Everyone has a story, but not everyone gets to tell it. Life gets busy. We talk, we text, but do we listen? Are you looking for real stories, raw and unchanged? Want to experience life through another's eyes, one story at a time? Daniel and Jenny have you covered. It's time to start the conversations, and that's the #truth.
Today's guest is Michael Doud. Michael is an explorer of both the inner and outer worlds of his life. Never did he think, as a 6-year-old boy standing on the sand in Redondo Beach, California, that he would travel the world. He explored Tibet, Europe, India, North America, Nepal, China, and other Asian countries, discovering how the people, culture, and belief structures of these countries are both different and the same as his own. Along the way, he also found that this travel was only an appetizer to life-changing and meaningful inner explorations. He learned that the more fascinating and more profound adventure was learning about how his mind and actions responded to work, relationships, killing, love, addiction, homelessness, parenting, and depression. From the cultural explosion brought forth by the protests and love-ins of the 1960s, to sitting in silence for 90 days in an Old English convent in 1998, falling into freedom is his journey to discover his 5 principles for personal freedom. These principles have helped him see things as they are and not how he wanted them to be. Wow. That is a bio and a half. You have lived a lot of life.
Yeah, it's been, today I'm 71.
You look great.
I know you do.
And I was reflecting this morning that I probably didn't expect to be here and breathing and alive. And it's not that I took a lot of risks. And I had a willingness to take another step. And often that step was into the unknown, both physically and mentally and spiritually. So I'm just surprised that I'm here, and it has been quite a journey. I never in my life would have thought that I would have been home in Tibet. I mean, it's like as soon as they got into the country, oh, here's home. And so how would you know that? Standing on the beach in Redondo Beach, where we spent all my childhood, looking out at the waves, thinking that that's where I would be. But so yeah, it's been a journey.
Now, you decided to write a book about the experiences that you had in life and kind of how you've progressed forward and the things that have helped you take that step in a new direction. What motivated you to do that, to put that on paper, to make that available to other people so they could, be helped as well?
I read mostly nonfiction books on philosophy, spirituality, and that sort of thing. And of course, I always thought, oh, I could write a book like that. And yeah, and it wasn't easy, and it isn't very good at times when I reread it now, and I would change it and all that sort of stuff. But partly it was, I wanted to share with my daughter things that I had learned. Granted, my daughter's path is going to be different, as everyone's path is different. But I chose her to be my daughter. I adopted her. And my heart is always thinking of her. She's about who I am. She's kept me alive. She's taught me more than she'll ever know. And I wanted to give back things that I learned by having her in my life, and me having to deal with all my demons and all my stuff. And so that's what sort of motivated me to do it. And the impetus is that I had taken this job with a company called AT&E, and they had made a wristwatch paging device.
Okay.
This is in 1989, long ago. And it was cutting edge technology.
Yeah.
And you could get pages on a watch, you could get stock quotes on a watch, you could get specific notes on a watch. And I joined this company as the director of MIS, their MIS systems, and had stock options and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, the marketing group spent all our money on some television ads, and it didn't catch on. And so we were bankrupt. And it was the first job that I had ever had that I felt like, wow, I'm at the edge of something really new and exciting. And so there I, you know, bankrupt company. And so now what do I do? And it was at a time I was 38 years old, and I had to begin to reflect on my life. And I looked at the stuff that I had. I had a really nice townhome in Pleasant Hill. It was multi-level, I think 3 or 4 different levels in the townhome, and views in it. I had plenty of furniture. I had 2 cars, and I was in the process of buying a pickup truck. For what reason, I don't know. It was about wanting to be and seen as successful, as being, well, look at him. Well, look at him. Well, you know, that sort of thing. And here I was, without a job again. And what am I going to do? And so I just got this wild idea to go camping. And so I went camping in Big Sur, dead of winter, the only person in the campground, cold as hell, rainy, windy, foggy, but I'm out there. And as the book starts, it talks about me sitting in a tent, absolutely frightened out of my mind because there's noises outside of the tent and I don't know what they are. And it sounds like it's a bear or a lion or something, and it's going to eat me. And so I do what I try to do is I try to meditate, and I couldn't. And I just curled up in a little ball. And I had a moment of reflection thinking, oh my God, this is what it's come to. I'm crouched in a little ball inside of a flimsy little tent in the middle of Big Sur campground. Nobody knows that I'm here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to die right here. This is the end of my life.
That's terrifying.
And you know, and of course the next morning, you know, I discovered it was probably a raccoon digging into some stuff that I had. And so I took a walk, and I realized that I just had this flood of thoughts and feelings and emotions that I had pretty much made a mess of my life. I'd gone through 2 marriages. I can't tell you how many relationships, and doing those relationships in a not honorable way. And I was unhappy. And what was I going to do? And if I didn't make a decision and live with the decision, then I might as well just not exist anymore. Because if I wasn't willing to change everything in my life, and that's the thing that I like most about myself, is that I have a willingness to try something.
That's awesome.
So I ended up standing on the edge of this cliff, which is depicted in the picture on the front of the book.
Right.
And I stood on the edge of that cliff, and I said, you either take a step forward and say, that's it, or you step back and you have to be willing to change everything and anything that comes along. You have to change how you approach it. And that started the journey. And that was a 10-year journey. And of course, you know, the whole thing's been a journey, and it's been a whole journey since. But that was a very significant moment in which I consciously made a decision to change.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about that consciousness. So that was the impetus for writing the book, to share with my daughter that experience, and to share with her, in some ways, what I did during that 10-year period and what I learned.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you a dad at that time when you were up there camping? Yeah.
Yes. So my daughter was born to my ex-wife in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
I was 19.
Mm-hmm.
She was 17, going on 18. And we knew each other in high school,
Okay.
my former wife and I. And I was in Vietnam, and I decided to extend my time in Vietnam for an additional 12 months so that I could get out of the Army early. I hated the Army more than I hated being in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a short leave. And so after my first 6 months, I had a short leave, and then I would be going back to Vietnam for a year.
Okay.
And during that short leave, I walked into Susan's house, and she had just had Michelle, and Michelle was laying there on this blanket between the living room and dining room, and I fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was because I'd been around so much death,
Mm-hmm.
and I had caused a lot of death. And part of it was a feeling of connection and hope of life. So when I got back from Vietnam, Susan and I dated, then we went and got married, and I formally adopted Michelle.
Yeah.
And so, so she, she was raised by kids. And bless her. I mean, because, I was 20 years old. Susan was 19 when we finally got together. And so it was just all this, we didn't know what we were doing, but Michelle trusted and knew that she was loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, she's kept me alive in different ways. And it's just an amazing connection. So yes, she was already at that point in time, born in 70, and that was 1989. So she was 19 already.
Okay. When you were at the camp, when you were camping, and
Yes.
to the edge of the cliff.
Yeah.
And you are there and you realize, I have to take a step and be willing to change anything, be willing to do whatever it takes to change my perspective about things. What did you do first, and how did you know what to do first?
I know, because that's a big deal.
So, I stepped back, obviously. I didn't go over the edge. And I can remember walking back to the campground thinking of all these things. And I said, just, stop. Just enjoy the space now, because there is going to be time for you to make those sorts of decisions. So I spent the rest of another week and a half, 2 weeks there, meditating and just sort of learning how to breathe again and relaxing. I had enough money in the bank to survive a little bit, and I had a home, which I knew that if I sold, I would probably not make much on it,
Mm-hmm.
because I had just moved into it. So, I tend to worry about stuff like that. And I said, you have to stop that. Be willing to stop worrying about something that you can't change at this moment. Just be in this space. So getting in the car and driving back and thinking, okay, this is a great road, and what am I going to do? And of course, that story just, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to? And I drove into the driveway and opened the garage door, and I said, I'm getting rid of this place.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a decision. So the next thing I did the next day is I called the real estate agent, and I took almost all of my furniture, and I either gave it away and sold some of it, but gave it all away and ended up with one of the 2 cars. And that was it. I remember backing out of the garage, with virtually very little furniture. I think I kept a couch. I kept all my mom's paintings. My mom was an abstract expressionist, so I had a bunch of paintings, and I put those in storage, and some clothes, and I backed out of the garage, and that's it. Now what? And that was the first thing I did is I tried to find a way to release myself from the attachment I had to things.
Okay. Yes.
So because I had been in this mode that, success meant that I had this house and I had these cars and I had all this stuff. Let's get rid of that. See what happens after that.
Okay.
So that was the first thing I did. And I ended up in a very small kind of a studio place in Larkspur, California, near the ferry. And I would go down to the coffee house that was near there. And it was called a clean, well-lighted place for books.
That's the
And
name
you
of
go
the
in there and
coffee shop?
drink. You could drink coffee and read books and read newspapers for free, except for the coffee, right? And so I read this ad about becoming a motivational speaker. I thought, whoa, I could do that.
Were you comfortable when you thought of that? Were you
just-
comfortable speaking in front of people already? Had you done some?
I'm at ease at speaking in front of large groups.
Okay, yeah.
At a party, I'm the person in the corner waiting for everybody to leave so I can leave, or finding a way to leave without people knowing that I was even there, but I could say I was there later.
Yeah.
Or I would respond if somebody talked with me. I am not one to go up to somebody and talk to them. I feel like I have no social skills in that way.
Okay.
I have no lines. I would know. There's so many people I would have liked to have dated or met in my life. There's no way. So a lack of confidence in that. But speaking in front of people, yeah, that's fine. I can do that because that's just an amorphous mass out there.
Yeah.
So I read this ad and I called and I got hooked in, and the group is called SAGE, SAGE, all caps, and it stood for Self-Actualization, Growth, Exploration. And I went to a couple of their introductory meetings, and I thought, they have some really good ideas and concepts behind what they're doing. And their goal was, which I learned along the way, is to have people pay them an amount of money for a specific territory, and then you cultivate that territory by putting on these SAGE Dreamwalk seminars.
Okay.
And Dreamwalk seminars are a Friday night through Sunday late afternoon seminar where you go through a whole set of exercises that begin to break open and break yourself out of who you are into seeing things differently. And so to do this, you had, as a prospective person, I had to go through all of their seminars. So the book talks about the different seminars that I went through and what I learned from them. And I learned a lot of great stuff. I also learned that the guy running it was kind of a jerk. And he was very into his money and signing up franchises and these territories, and he double sold the one that I bought from him. So I got angry and divorced myself from the group. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned about forgiveness and how much forgiveness I had to do towards my mom and my dad for what I felt was really mistreatment. My parents believed in corporal punishment, to sometimes at the extreme. My dad drank, And when he got drank, he was an ugly drunk.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I never thought that they actually ever saw me as a person. I was sort of a miniature them, and they were going to present to the world the best son that they could present so that they looked good.
Okay.
It was all about them looking good to the world. And you know, my parents were children of the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was at age 16. Her dad said, "You don't go to school anymore. You go into the mills and you work. You
Yeah.
need to provide money to the family."
Right.
And so my mom carried a lot of resentment and wanted certain things. My dad was an only child. His dad was gone all the time. He worked on the railroad. He was gone all the time. His mom, my grandmother Queenie, who is one of the closest people in my life, still is. She ran a mercantile store, and so my dad was left alone a lot as an only child, and he had, and so they didn't have real skills on how to raise a child. Not saying that I did any better. In some ways, my brother and I both, we changed some of the behavior. The hitting was out. You know, that doesn't work. So I learned about forgiveness, and there were specific exercises that I think I talk about in the book where you really you do this thing about forgiving your mom and forgiving your dad while looking in the eyes of other people. Men, when you look at a man, you say, "I forgive you, Dad," because every person is connected in some way. And so your dad is in everybody, and your mom is in everybody, and mixtures of them. And so you could see those things, and you know, it would amaze me how much sadness and hurt I carried from that. So I learned a lot about forgiveness from the seminars and other things, you know, philosophical things and how the mind works and what we pay attention to and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And you were so during the SAGE seminars, you were about 40?
Yes.
And so when you were 40, you just started to learn about these things and consider where your parents came from. That's a big shift that I think a lot of people probably don't do, at least people who I know. I think it's difficult for a lot of people, and they never get around to seeing their parents for who they are and what they went through, and then how it relates back to you. And it brings do you feel it brought a lot of understanding to you and was a step in your journey of forgiveness toward them?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to take this off because what you said is very powerful. It's hard to really understand your parents and their path unless you stop your story about you and how they affected you. It's about seeing them and what was it like for them. And that was one of the most, so I can remember one of the exercises we did in SAGE was that we wrote down all the words that we heard about our parents and family say about each other. And in my family it was tough as nails, nose to the grindstone, head up guy, quiet, mean, you know, and so I started thinking about these words that, you know, nose to the grindstone. You know, my dad worked all the time. I worked all the time. It was one of the things that my daughter disliked about me a lot was that I always worked. I worked on weekends. Didn't matter if I worked for a company or, you know, I give everything. And so those storylines, and oh, where did that come from? Oh, my mom and dad. Oh, their parents. And so you begin to understand where you come from and why they raised you. I think all parents do the best they can.
Yes, I think so.
They do the best they can. It's just that when you look at it, sometimes you go, that's not very good. Kids raised around, I'm going to bring up an odd subject, but kids raised around families that shoot guns.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a natural thing. Well, look what happens in our society. And, my grandmother, she had shotguns and she had her favorite shotgun. And my dad taught me how to shoot. After I killed somebody, I'm never touching a gun again because I have to live with that. And so it's just, I'm really going around your question, but.
Oh, no, you're not. But it goes back also to what you were saying is you said we were kids raising kids. Well, I mean, I've said that about myself and a lot of people do. Like a lot of parenting, not all of it, but there's a lot that's like you have to just figure it out when it happens.
Right. And you draw upon what you know. And sometimes what we know are behaviors and thoughts that were passed on to us because we made it here. I guess it's okay to use it here. and to change that. And so one of the things my daughter said to me that always endears me to her is that she looked at me one day and she said, Dad, you're the only person I know who said they were going to change and did.
Aww.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, wow, she saw me.
Mm-hmm.
She saw me. She had enough distance to be able to see me and not get caught up in all of the stuff. And, it's, and so I think, if we stop a moment before we take actions with our children and think about it and do some of the, and when you're not pressured, think about where you came from and how you got to be this way. One, you gain more compassion for your parents and maybe more into their family trees and how they were brought up. But you begin to have more compassion for yourself. And when you have more compassion for yourself and understanding for you, you do better with your children. You're going to make mistakes.
Of course.
Period.
That's what it's about.
But that's the story. That's the story. So it was very powerful for that. And despite the way I left Sage, upset, I learned a lot about breaking down those components within ourselves and doing that chart of what are the words that my family and my ancestors talk about when they make descriptions about other people and the people in their family. Very powerful.
So you leave Sage, and then what's next? Where do you go from there?
Well, I ended up living in my car, so I was homeless for a while, and I began to learn about the different things that I thought I could learn, use, grow from that would have me be more at peace in here. And so one of the things I did was I needed to resolve stuff with my parents. So I actually went and I was living in my car. So I said, hey, I know I'm going to need to get to work soon because I'm running out of money. But I want to come and spend some time with you guys to better understand you, to tell you what I've learned about you and myself. And if you want to know about me, you're free to ask. On the latter, they chose really not to do much. They didn't really choose to do that. And I think they were afraid of what I might say that would make them look bad. And they didn't want to look bad. And, I found that interesting. But what I did is that I got a chance to learn about them. And I asked them more about their history and who they were and, that sort of thing. And understood my mom's path a little bit better because she was sort of I don't talk about stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so me coming with an open heart and knowing that I've forgiven you. We're good. So, it created a relaxed sort of way. And then when I had to figure out I needed to work, I started getting all panicky again and I would be worried about possessions and all this other stuff. And, oh God, will that old story come back? And will I find myself on the edge of the cliff again?
Okay.
Can I continue to walk this path of growing and learning and still do other things? So I picked up a book that had been recommended to me many times over the years. It's called A Course in Miracles.
Okay.
By the Foundation for Inner Peace. And I'll be upfront, I am not a Christian. And this is sort of a Christian-based book.
Okay.
In its way. Well, when I opened it, it just, excuse the expression, gobsmacked me. I sat down in the bookstore and I'm sitting there reading some of these things. And the first lesson is everything you see is not real. What do you mean? That book is real. No, it's not. It's not really real. And so what the book does is that, and what I loved about it is that it gave explanations about Christ consciousness and awakening and that sort of thing in a context that I get it. I get it. And it is somewhat different than how Christians view it. But it is a very Christian-like book. And it even looks like that. And of course I went through my own embarrassment about carrying around a book that looked like the Bible and because I had my own stories about religion and my experiences with them. But that book really was powerful and again started to, so attachment to things, and that resonated with what the Buddha said. If you're attached to anything or you have an aversion, it's the same thing, but the opposite ends to anything, you're going to suffer, period. And that's what this book was saying. And in the lessons, and there's 365 lessons, you can only do one a day. You don't have to do it every day. I chose to do, I'm a process guy, right? Okay, I'm taking this on. I'm going to do each lesson each day, just like it said.
That's pretty good. I would have jumped ahead. I would have been able to control myself.
There's 3 sections in the book. There's a text section, there are the lessons, and then there's a glossary or a sort of an indexing that explains things. So I'm going to start all 3 sections at the same time.
You're going all in.
That's me, right? Go all in. Willingness to go all in. And I learned a lot about there's a quote, and I'm gonna screw it up, but it goes something like this: the holiest of all places on earth is where an ancient enemy becomes your friend. And yeah, I get that. Because all of that stuff has been set aside, and you see that you are each other. We are one. We are one. Einstein, he has this great quote. Again, I'm gonna screw it up, but in essence, he says, when we get out of our delusion of separateness and open up, we learn the consciousness of one, and that's where you begin as one. And so all of these things, I'm doing all these readings, and so I'm doing this book, and then, I'm going to have to get a job now. Can I do the lessons? Well, what if I'm in a meeting and it's time for me to do the lesson? Or am I going to be doing my little lesson? That's not real. That's not real. In my head, while this meeting's going on, will I be present? Will I be able to do all that? Mm-hmm. So that was another step, is reading this book and going through it consciously and understanding that I can do this. I can do this. And, freaking about what am I going to do for work? And does my work have to reflect, as the Buddha would say, right livelihood? And I'm thinking, oh, God, I don't know anything right livelihood. I mean, what? I could go volunteer somewhere, but I'm not going to be able to survive. All those stories go in my head. And what I ended up doing is realizing that, I'll give you an example, 2 examples. My brother, I gave him a camera when he was 16. He's been a photographer ever since.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
He knows and knew what he wanted to do. The doctor that lived across the fairway when I was growing up, and at one point in time, my dad actually made a little money, and we actually lived on a golf course right on the fairway and across the fairway. Of course, we were in the poorest house on the fairway. Across the fairway was our doctor, Dr. Granzella. And I remember going to Dr. Granzella once, and I said, how did you know you wanted to be a doctor? Because I was trying to figure out when I was a kid, what am I going to do when I grow up? Mm-hmm. And he goes, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. And so I'm going through this existential crisis, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. When I had this story I used to tell myself, and I'm in my mid-teens, right? When God passed out purpose, he just looked at me and said, nah. And I got left out. No purpose. I'm walking the planet with no purpose. And I remember sitting in meditation on the beach at Morro Bay, and I was getting ready to think about leaving, staying with my parents. And I'm sitting there. It's about 40 minutes into the meditation, and I open my eyes and I go, oh, it's not what I do, it's how I do it.
It's a big distinction that
no matter what.
It's so key, but it's so, in some ways, it's hard to describe in a way. I know what you mean, because in a way it's so invisible, because physically around you, nothing right. is different. It could be the same job or the same whatever, but yet it's different without being different.
Mm. What I learned is that I have this ability to do things and stay with it. And when I think it's complete, it generally, from the society's point of view, it's complete. Mm-hmm. I do a good job. Mm-hmm. I can live with that. It doesn't matter what I do, it's how I do it. Mm-hmm. How do I approach it? Do I approach it honestly, openly, willing to change, willing to learn, and willing to put the pieces together and do the work to make something of quality? And quality is one of those things that you can't really write a description of quality, but everybody knows it when they see it.
It's very true.
They sure do. And also so do we.
Right?
If we're giving it or producing it or endeavoring to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that realization was a powerful realization in the story of, oh, I can do anything now. It doesn't matter. And the next day I get an email from a guy that I'd sent a resume to years earlier
Oh my.
that was, and it was to be a implementation consultant for a software called Project Workbench. This is in the early 1990, I guess it was. And I had used Project Workbench, and I'm dating myself here, in a DAWs version, not Windows,
Yeah.
DAWs version,
Yeah.
where you just had things on a screen, and a DAWs version. And I understood how it worked, and I liked it because it's very logical.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a process guy. I walk into any restaurant, any store, any home, anywhere, and I can tell you what works about it and what doesn't work about it. How it flows, how it doesn't flow, where bottlenecks are. It's just how my mind is.
Mm-hmm.
That's and it's great and it's horrible because I walk in places and sometimes I can't get beyond how it's not working to see the beauty in there. And so it's a funny sort of thing. But so he called me up and says, you know, we're want to expand to the West Coast, and you sent us this resume. Are you interested? I said, sure. He said, well, let's have an interview in San Francisco. So I drove up to San Francisco and I got a job with Applied Business Technology. And during their transition from DOS to Windows, and I had to learn a lot about my ego in that one, learning things about, I worked for this company and I found myself defending their product when I knew there were things about it that weren't right.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was becoming aware enough to see myself doing that. Mm-hmm. And I remember something that a psychologist told me in 1921. He said, power is defensivelessness. Mm. So when you don't become defensive, you're empowered. Mm-hmm. If you become defensive, you've given up your power to whatever you're defending.
Because in a way you're unable to learn.
And so what teaching those classes, Project Workbench classes and working with consultants, I had to learn how to accept my company's failings in delivering a Windows correct product, provide them input, but also acknowledge it to the client. Yes, this doesn't work the way you want it to work, and this is a way that we can work around that. And mm-hmm. that was what I was good at. Mm-hmm. And so I became very good at it, and ended up starting my own company. My dad died in 1995, which was a fabulous experience. And truly one where I could practice the practice of letting go. Mm-hmm. And to be there for him and not be attached to who he was or what he did and all that sort of stuff. And so in honor of him, I started my own business because he'd been kind of an entrepreneur off and on throughout his life. Mm-hmm. And, interestingly enough, I made more money then than I ever thought I would ever make in my entire life.
Really?
And I lived in an apartment in San Francisco, and I didn't have any furniture because remember I gave it all away. So I put a rower. I put a rower machine in the refrigerator in the living room. And that was what I had, and I had a blow up bed from when my daughter visited. And she'd look at me and go, "Dad, you make enough money to do more than this."
How old was she at that point? When
20, in her early 20s.
Okay.
Where it's important that Dad, be cool. So learning about how to to do these things and to learn about forgiveness, to learn about attachment and how we get attached to ideas and concepts of who we are, of others, to things. And it doesn't mean that you can't have them or have a preference to something. Like I prefer driving a BMW to another car that I might rent. Not that the other car is bad. I like how I like the quality and the feel of my car. But if I'm attached to it, then I'm in trouble because then I have to make sure I pay for it. And so my whole life gets driven by having to do that. There's a story, a friend of mine who's an accountant had a great, I love this story because it really put a marker in something, and that's why I don't forget it. So my accountant friend named Ken Miller, who's since passed, he had a client, he was telling me about this client of his who had grown this business into this great thing, and he's buying cars and houses, vacation homes, and a new boat. And so Ken says, I asked him, so how do you like all this stuff? And he goes, Ken, what I've learned is that I don't own any of this stuff. It owns me. It owns me. It drives him to do more of what he's doing. He's, it's vicious. And that's what's true. So I can't let all those outside things, like even trying to sell a book. It's there if people want it. I can't get attached to being successful, whether it sells or not. And maybe that keeps the sales minimal, but I'd rather be here and be okay than end up pushing or getting caught into the story of having to sell this. And so it's a dance. And so it's that attachment aversion thing, letting go. When my dad passed, to breathe with him, to match his breathing in his final breath, in and out. I wasn't about me. I was riding with him and letting him know that I'm with him. And just the moment he's willing to let go, it's all good. So learning how to let go, and letting go doesn't mean you condone behavior or that you ignore it or anything like that. And then non-self, which is the fourth principle of freedom. We have a body. Yeah, that's granted. We have thoughts, we have feelings.
We do.
And none of them stay the same, right? I look at myself in the mirror and I go, who is that?
I've done that too.
Right? And, that feeling of joy that I had yesterday, what happened to it? Try holding on to a moment of joy for longer than a half hour. It changes, it shifts. Same with feelings. So, Buckminster Fuller, and again, I'm paraphrasing a quote, but he has this quote that talks about, I am not a noun. I think I'm more like a verb. I think I'm just constantly changing. And that the only thing that happens is constant change. So if I can rest into that change, if I can trust in change and that I will evolve, I don't need to be any one thing. I'm just an evolutionary process. I'm a bundle of energy that happens to be in this body that uses the five senses to receive input, and it reacts and responds to that. And that's all that it is. And if in my response, I connect with others and can help others, and I can learn to be more of a light to myself, then automatically I'm a light to others, because that's what I will see in them.
That's what your journey, this has been your whole life has been a journey, but from the cliff's edge until now, this is a part of your journey in moving forward, is accepting the changes that come, and that we don't hold on to one thing forever. The joy, for example.
Yeah.
So part of your journey is being able to accept the things that are changing.
If I can't accept, it's like, Michael J. Fox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when he got Parkinson's disease, he could have resigned himself to never act again.
Mm-hmm.
What he did was, and there's a quote on it, and I don't have it with me right now, but I'm again paraphrasing. I learned to accept what is so that I could take another step and go beyond it. And Einstein has a quote that's almost exactly to that. It says, once you've learned to accept, then you can begin to grow. So Michael J. Fox learned to accept that he has Parkinson's, and his roles in The Good Wife and in the Good Something. There's another program called The Good Something, where he plays an attorney with the condition.
Mm-hmm.
He continues his acting because he's accepted what is and takes another step.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important part of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what acceptance is. It's not condoning behavior. It's not resignation. It's not giving up. It's seeing things as they are, not as we want them to be, and not as we are. It's seeing things as they are and move to the next step. And if you don't mind, I'm going to share an experience that is in the book that to me is very powerful about acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on this 90-day meditation retreat, right? And, I go through times during these 90 days where I think, I got it. I'm there, only to find myself totally attached to something and to an idea or a concept that I've got it, that it's there, that I'm it. And I find myself in this mind game going on, and I'm, oh, well, this isn't working very well. And I had a really beautiful long meditation. So this is a couple weeks before I'm leaving the retreat. And I'm walking down the driveway, and it's about 4:35 in the morning, and it's, there's just a little light in the sky. And all of a sudden I have this realization that I'm really hearing my steps, feeling my body, and I'm seeing, and I'm just seeing. There's very little reaction or inaction. It's just walking. So I get to the end of the driveway, and this is interesting. And I turn right, and I see this cow. And I well, first off, there's these cows. There's cows everywhere near this place, and there's a bunch of cows out in this field, and you can hear them eat. And they're breathing, and they're slowly walking through the wet grass. And there's this cow down the road, and it's got his head stuck through this fence, this barbed wire fence.
Oh.
And it's eating. And I walk up to it, and I look, and one eye is infected, and there's flies on it. And the other eye is fine. And I didn't have any aversion to the infected eye. And I didn't have any, oh, this is better, seeing the good eye. It was like, oh, It just is.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, I look up, and it was like, you've seen those crystal glass things that people put over food, like on a picnic or something.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It was like somebody picked it off me, and the whole world was one thing. And I was one thing. And I was of the world, in the world, and they were interchangeable. It was all interchangeable. And my mind started, it was really interesting because my mind started to think, oh, am I tricking myself?
Right.
And then I let go of that thought. Letting go is an important part of meditation. And I realized that all of this is just as it is. And an overwhelmingness of peace and freedom just sort of flowed through me. And it was like something I can never unlearn. I will be caught in my drama and get upset about certain things that happen in my life, but I can't unlearn that. And all I have to do is sit down for a moment and start breathing. And I get to recall not that moment, but that it's all one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just accepting things as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And my getting really upset about something may or may not change something, but I have to own the actions of me getting upset. I have to, I have said rude things to like the person at the post office, got in my car, driven a half a mile away, turned around and gone back, got in line again and went up to that person and apologized.
Mm.
Because it wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
I was stuck in my story and not paying attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
So making a very long story out of something short, but what you're saying, Daniel, is that yes, acceptance is the out breath.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are. I'm sitting here talking to these two really wonderful people who emailed me out of the blue, and it's being able to be engaged and to see the event and be of it all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, the story from that moment of stepping back until today is that it's always ongoing. It's a continual learning process. And my 5 principles of freedom, which are forgiveness, which is one that almost everybody can do and get immediate results from, through understanding that attachment and aversion will cause suffering. No matter what you do, it's going to cause some sort of suffering. That letting go helps to relieve that suffering, that attachment, that non-self, that ego that wants to say, I'm here, can't you see me, I'm here. And whether it's in an egotistical way or whether it's just recognition, understand that it's always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And not holding on to, again, attachment, letting go, holding on to that idea of self, that it's ever evolving, and accepting all of that. If I look at those 5 principles, that can create a moment and a place of freedom from within that allows more to happen out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to show up to that.
That's really
awesome.
Yeah. What you say is really powerful. I know it takes a lot of people a lot of years, and I know it's taken you a lot of years. I see that you've been meditating for 50 years, and in what you had written to us, it's been the last 35 years that it's been part of your daily practice. So it took, even from the start of it, 15 years, if I'm doing my math correctly, to have that become part of daily practice. And, it's something that, as you mentioned, you keep working at and keep learning from and keep changing and growing and discovering.
Because it's all, nothing's permanent. Everything is impermanent. We talked about our bodies. Take a picture of yourself today and look at it again in 20 years. It's like, whoa, I've changed. Same with feelings and thoughts and everything. Everything is always evolutionary. And if we can accept that it's all evolutionary, it makes being in this world a heck of a lot easier. Because when we hold on to something of what success is, or what this is, or what that is, we're setting ourselves up to suffer. And it doesn't mean that I still don't do that. I do. When I get wronged by some software that said they weren't going to do that, and it does this, and I go, there I am. And I get to laugh at myself because, So, yeah.
So, Falling into Freedom. This is the book that we've been reading. I know you said, which every writer says, oh, I wish I could have gone back and changed this or that. As the reader, phenomenal. Your message comes through very strongly. The tools are helpful. The stories raw and real and honest, and you do approach it with the openness that you talk about approaching life with, and you can see that in these pages. And we've really been enjoying it. Dan's been, I think he's only got a few pages left to finish the book, but it's a really good resource and a really good life story. So where would people, if they want to order this, what would be the best place for them to go order?
Well, Amazon, of course, and you can get it, online version, or you can get a real book version. Or you can if you go to my website, you can order it there, michaeldoud.com.
Okay.
And if you order it there, I would, I'll sign it. You fill a little thing and tell me what would you, who do I make this out to? And I'll sign the book. Not that anybody wants my signature for anything, but for some people it meant something. So I created that. So thank you.
And are you working on a couple new projects as well?
Yeah, I'm always keeping busy. So I started to create a YouTube channel.
Okay.
And on the YouTube channel, I have and they're rough, but I'm going to work on them probably next year. I'm really focused on it. But I have 2 talks on each of the 5 principles of freedom.
Okay.
So it's just me talking and telling stories, some of these stories and other stories on the 5 principles of freedom to try to give them some more body, some more meat, some more flavor and feel. So I worked on that. I'm going to expand that YouTube channel eventually. It's going to have talks on openness, on oneness, which is a wonderful talk that I've done these talks I've given meditation on Zoom meditation to I used to have a Zoom meditation class, and so I've done a few of those. I'm also working on 3 books, all in various stages. One is going to be, and it's probably the one I'm going to focus on first now, is a companion piece to the 5 principles of freedom. It's going to be a short book. It's going to just focus on those 5 principles of freedom. It's not going to have a whole lot of my stories in there. There'll be some stories to make points, but it's just going to be a companion piece. If people are interested in just those 5 principles and what they mean and how they work. There's a book called Long Walk Home. And I have the cover photo, which I took for it.
What's that one about?
Long Walk Home is sort of what happened after 1998, after I sat for 90 days. What did I do? So the story is about, and I'll say it quickly, hopefully. The story is about when I left there, I had stopped my business, and I still had some things that I wanted to do. So I decided I was going to walk through Asia. And so I was planning that trip. and I was planning that trip, and my daughter calls me, and I think it was probably August, September. She said, "Dad, she was pregnant with my first granddaughter, and she said, I'm thinking of hiring a nanny after my child is born." She didn't know it was a Rachel. After my child is born, for about 5 to 6 months, because she's a school teacher. She said, I want to have tenure, and I want to get tenure, and I need to complete the school year. She said, what do you think about that? And I said, well, if I hire the right person, I think it'd be fine. I'm not going to think less of you. And I think part of her question was around, would I be a bad mom if I did that? And I thought about it overnight, and I called her the next day. I said, how about me?
I had a feeling you might have gone there.
And she said, what? I said, how about me? I said, I'm going to Asia. I'll be back late February, late February, just before you have to go back and do, back to the classroom. I said, I'd be happy to do it. My criteria is this. I'm the nanny from 7 to 6:30 or earlier, 5 days a week. Want any Saturday or evening time, you have to ask. I'm going to sleep in your spare bedroom. I want you to buy my food, but I'm going to tell you what food I want, because I'm vegetarian and they're not. And if you can live with those rules, and your husband, Scott, can live with that, I'm happy to do it. She said, well, I think that'd be great. I said, well, I think you need to talk to Scott first. You don't add another adult in the house.
Right.
And so I did that. I was a nanny to my granddaughter for
wow, that's awesome.
about 5.5, 6 months of her life. Interesting story about that. My daughter was born when I was fighting in Vietnam. My granddaughter was born when I was visiting Vietnam 30 years later.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Working on forgiveness. So the book contains my walk through Asia, being a little bit about being a nanny. And then I ended up working and learning a lot more lessons. And then I went back and I managed the retreat center where I sat for 90 days, for a year, as a volunteer manager. And I ended up having a lot of my irresponsible and irresponsible behavior towards relationship and women come to my face. And so the story about Long Walk Home is takes you through what I learned about my interpersonal relationships and the lack of integrity in them. And it ends up where I'm walking down Market Street in San Francisco, and I have this epiphany about what happened to me when I was 5 years old, and how that event, which I had long forgotten, changed how I viewed relationships and how I responded and acted in relationships my entire life. And so it's just the long walk home. And then the other book I'm tinkering with and thinking about is just taking a lot more of the experience of walking through Asia for 6 months, because I spent my time with a lot of monks in different temples. I sat in all sorts of temples and places all over India, all over Tibet, all over Nepal, all over Thailand, and in Vietnam. And just my experience of understanding that we're all one. And sort of just that whole thing. Now, whether anybody would buy any of that stuff, I don't know, but it's just a way to give my daughter more. I mean, her life is very different, and so it gives her a chance to also, she's heard me talk about them, but something that she can have and she can pass down at some point.
Yeah, that's very special to do that because of
Then
her, to be able to have that part of you in a book, on paper, to share.
And I think everybody's has a story. I've had people say, "Oh, I've not had such an interesting life." I disagree.
I bet I agree with you.
If you dig, everybody has a story.
100%.
Everybody has a story.
Yeah.
You started. Oh, go ahead.
And then the last thing I'm working on, I don't know if you've heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens.
No.
It's digital art that is has a specific ownership address through Ethereum, which is blockchain technology in the Bitcoin arena. So I got to thinking about art that I used to do when I was sitting in class in high school, because I wanted to look like I was busy, but I didn't care about what they were saying. So I would take a piece of paper and a pen, and I would draw one continuous line, never intersecting with itself, and see how much of a continuous line of squiggles I can make on a piece of paper. So I said, ooh, I liked doing that because it's very meditative and very focused. And so I'm doing that digitally, and I've created some digital art that I'm going to auction or sell, try to auction and sell on these websites where they auction NFTs.
Okay.
Which are non-fungible tokens is what they're called.
Okay.
And it's digital art, and people are doing digital art of videos. They're doing 3D dimensional digital art. They're taking pictures of paintings and putting it up as digital art. And in fact, the second largest sale of an artist being alive happened this past February. And it was $69 million that somebody paid for a digital art.
Wow.
And with the digital art sale, what happens is that they own the rights to use that art however they want. And if they sell it, the owner gets 10% of the originator gets 10% of that sale, and that continues on no matter what. So it's sort of a thing that people can buy and sell and that sort of thing. But it got me back doing art, and my mom passed a year ago, March, and she was an artist. And it sort of I find it sort of a way to sort of connect with her in my own way. This is my art, very different than hers, but this is my art. Yeah. So it's sort of coalescing. So that's what I'm doing these days.
Nice.
That's awesome.
You had started to say that the Long Walk Home, the cover, is that your design? Is that what you were gonna? Yeah.
Yeah, I took the picture for it, and it's in a lane in England, and it might be on my website. I don't know, but it's a lane that I walk all the time when I'm in England meditation. I'm going again for 30 days in November, because it's very misty there, and it's early morning. It's just this reflective mist single lane road that kind of goes between these hedgerows and kind of goes off like that with trees all around it. And it's just, we all face a long walk. We are, as I forget who said it. Maybe it was Ram Dass. He said, we're all really here just walking each other home.
Mm.
We're all here doing the same thing, walking each other home. And it's a quasi quote of Ram Dass.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm rambling again.
No, you're
rambling.
wonderful.
You're not rambling.
You're absolutely delightful, and we have really, really enjoyed talking with you. Wish we lived closer. We always do that. We meet people and we're like, oh, we wish you weren't halfway across the country. But you have such a wonderful experience and lifetime of information to share with people, and it's been an honor to have you on our program, and we're so thankful that you were able to join us today.
Thank you so much. And I would definitely recommend to any of our listeners that they read, get your book and read it. It's very worthwhile, and it's deep and it's meaningful.
Oh, thank you.
And
it was, it was written from my heart.
I could tell. You could definitely tell. You could definitely tell.
And it's even all that more, like, oh, wow, when we know that it was already amazing, but to know that the inspiration behind that is your daughter. And
yeah, that's amazing.
It's really special.
I am just incredibly grateful that I have her as my daughter, and my grandkids are amazing. One's in a PhD program at Texas A&M, and the other one's at UCLA.
Wow.
And they're good, honest people.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. And they have a long, they would probably look at this stuff and go, but it doesn't matter. They're on their journey. Everybody has their journey.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
As the Buddha said, you have to find out for yourself.
I suspect they would think their granddad's cool.
Yeah.
I'm the fun granddad.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you are.
I show up, and I'm, I fail in front of them.
Yeah, you're ready to go.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us. Anything else that you want to share that we haven't touched on, or?
The other thing is, which I didn't write in the first book. I talked about it in the first book about going to Vietnam and killing somebody and having that moment in which I realized I had lost my innocence as a human being when you take another's life. And of course, it led to all sorts of stuff and drugs and me just sort of processing it. So 30 years later, as I mentioned in this talk, and mentioned Long Walk Home, I went back to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my reasoning for going back is to forgive myself and ask for forgiveness for my actions. And no matter where I went, I'd see people in Vietnam, and some would look at me like I was the enemy. And in my heart, please forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
Please forgive me. And it wasn't until I got to Hue, where I spent a year of my time in Vietnam, in which I was approving airstrikes and bombing runs into Laos and North Vietnam and just decimating countryside and people. And anyway, I went back to Hue, and I went to this temple where originally, back in 1970, I had found my interpreter had found a family of 3 people who were taking care of some gold Buddhas that were in a temple. And they had taken them out of the temple, and they were holding them because they didn't want the Americans or the North Vietnamese to take these Buddhas out of their temple. And I went back to the temple, and the Buddhas were there, and I just said, oh, that's, they made it.
Yeah.
I felt so very happy about that. And so then I went to the Hung Vuong Hotel, which was about a block and a half away from where I was stationed up there. And I walked into the lobby, and this young woman, probably about 25, was standing behind the counter, and she looked at me and she said, welcome. Have you been here before? And of course, I could feel that welling up sadness and pain and sadness. And I said, yes, a long time ago. And she looked at me and she said, we forgive you.
Oh, wow.
And I dropped to my knees in the lobby and crying.
Wow. That's very powerful.
And I looked at her in full realization. She wasn't alive when this was going on. She had no real direct experience, but she had direct experience that she brought through from her family, her history, the history of the country. And she saw in here and knew what I needed. It was incredibly powerful. And I've often said that forgiveness, one of the 3 rules of forgiveness, the last one is that it's mostly for the forgiver, not the forgiven. However, often the forgiven also receives benefit. And at that moment, the benefit of this young girl just saying, we forgive you, incredibly powerful, and helped me to be able to breathe more around it. I could never.
I'm sure it did.
Having been responsible for thousands of deaths, sometimes it's hard to live with. But she made it a hell of a lot easier to move on, to let go, and understand that, I took those actions. I would not take them today. And that's the honorable part about it. I will not take it today.